On this episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, we're headed down to Georgia to check out some classics from the 50s, some old school hot rods, some customs, old motorcycles, vintage parts everywhere, and two very special 1961 Chevrolet Impala bubble tops. You gotta check this place out. Before I get too carried away, I wanna remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And don't forget about my merchandise. I've got a link in the description. Go check that stuff out. So if you've seen some of my other videos, you've probably heard me mention Paradise Drag Strip in Calhoun, Georgia. It's an iconic old school track, and they've hosted nostalgia drag races there and swap meets, car shows, that type of stuff. And I've been going there for the last 15 years or so. So the guy that was responsible for kind of bringing in those nostalgia races to Paradise Drag Strip, we all call him BB. And he's a hot rodder to the core. He's got tons of cool projects and things that, you know, I knew that he had. I knew that he had an old school Willy's drag car. I knew that he had, you know, some 60s classics, but I had no idea that he had all this other stuff stashed away. So I think you're really going to enjoy this. And what I'm going to do is kind of break this up. Instead of doing one giant video that shows everything he's got, I'm going to break this into two parts. So the first part, the one you're watching right now, is going to be all the stuff that's indoors. So he's got this giant building that's sort of like a museum, and then he has a race shop which has his Willys and another really cool old school race car project in there. And then for the second part, which will come next week, I'm going to show you the stuff that's in the woods and show you the stuff that's behind the buildings and that's in the sheds and, you know, kind of the leftover projects and forgotten projects that BB and his dad have collected over the years. Let's get started on this. The first thing that I noticed when I walked through here was a cross ram intake manifold for a small block Chevy sitting right there on the office table. And then as we pan around, you'll notice a Model A Ford sitting up on top of an office building roof. So they got these offices built out, and they built a really strong roof, apparently, strong enough to put a car on. And then as we look around here, there's another vehicle on the roof. This time it's an old school tractor sitting up on the roof, and a couple of old school moonshine stills. And if you know anything about North Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee, you know, this was moonshine country. And these are two old school legitimate moonshine stills. And as we make our way through, we're going to see a nicely restored Model A Ford pickup. And then we're going to get into some more street rod and custom cars. We got a 32 Ford Sedan. This car's been together for years and years. And BB and his dad have made lots of memories in this car, driving it to street rod shows and rod runs and things like that over the years. And then there's a 34 Ford Roadster Pro Street car that's sitting there next to it. Another car that's been with the family for years. I think he said they built this in the early 90s, and they've put lots and lots of miles on it. Had lots of fun with that thing. Back in behind those two street rods, you'll see some really cool vintage go-karts. You got an old school, late 50s Corvette go-kart sitting there on the shelf, and then two vintage NASCAR themed go-karts hanging up from the rafters. And then on these shelves, there's lots of cool parts here. You'll notice that they're not just piled up. These are kind of strategically placed, and some pretty good stuff sitting here. You've got some old school Corvette hubcaps. You've got 348 and 409 valve covers, exhaust manifolds. You got all sorts of cool stuff sitting here. You know, these are really nice parts that could be used on a restored car or a hot rod or just about anything. They're sitting there ready to go. As we make our way along the back wall of the shop, you'll notice some really cool stuff. You've got a 50s bullet nose Studebaker nose that's been made into a clock, and it's laying up against either a 348 or a 409. I'm guessing 348 based on the intake and carburetors. And then we've got this whole wall full of intake manifolds. You got single four, you got two fours, you got three twos, you got a tunnel ram. There's really just about anything that you want sitting right here. And then as we go down through here, you'll notice lots of other cool engines on stands. You got small blocks. I noticed one's a 265, like an early small block. And then we got a big block Chevrolet. There's even a Ford motor sitting down there. Then we've got a Buick nailhead and lots of other parts and pieces of other engines laying around here as well. One thing I noticed about the collection of cars that BB and his dad have accumulated over the years is a lot of these are really good cruisers. You know, get in, hit the road, really comfortable cars. And we'll take a look here at some of these. We've got a 50s Buick that's a four-door hardtop. Then we got a little Chevy Corvair, and then next to it is a 50s Oldsmobile, two-door hardtop, another really nice cruiser. And then we got a giant Cadillac four-door hardtop. I mean, you're not going to find a more comfortable, highway-friendly car than this thing right here. Next to it is another 50s Buick four-door hardtop, and finally to end this row is a 1960 Impala Convertible. Beautifully restored car. This black and white 56 Chevrolet four-door is BB's dad's car, and they've set this thing up to where he can drive it anywhere he wants to go. It's got a fuel-injected small block, it's got radial tires on it, it's ready to hit the road. This next row has a pretty wide variety. We got an 80s Corvette, then we've got one of those easy rod Thunderbirds. It's sort of like a 90s Thunderbird with a 49 or 50 model Ford front and back end on it. Kind of a cool conversion kit thing that they did years ago. Then we got a 51 Ford Custom sitting next to it, 56 Chevrolet Bel Air two-door hardtop, really nice, clean car. And then we got a giant Cadillac Eldorado from the 70s. Tucked in the back of the shop is a 70s Corvette. Then we've got a neat little MG Roadster sitting here next to a 56 Thunderbird, another nicely restored car. And finally on the end of this row is a little Triumph sports car. Next up we got a 69 Corvette, a 60s Thunderbird, and then the next two cars are really special to BB and his dad. These are two 1961 Chevrolet Impala bubble tops. One is a little more significant than the other, but both have a lot of history with the family. This one is BB's very first car. He said when he was a teenager he was given the choice of two different cars to be his first car, an early 60s Thunderbird, which we'll see in next week's video, and a 1961 Chevrolet Impala bubble top. It doesn't get much cooler than an early 60s bubble top, and this thing, you know, it didn't have the big engine or any kind of rare options or anything like that, but it was super cool. And I mean, for your first car, it's kind of hard to beat. BB had a pretty good reason for choosing the 61 bubble top as his first car, and that's because his dad had a 61 bubble top, and this is it. This is the car that his dad had back in the 60s and throughout the 70s and 80s, and you know, he resisted the urge to sell this thing, and he still got it. And what makes it really cool is it is a factory super sport car. That means that this is one of 453 cars built in 1961. Extremely rare car. And 1961 was a tricky year for production numbers on these super sport cars because there was factory super sports and there was dealer installed super sports. And the factory super sport, we have a solid number, 453. That's how many were produced. That's documented. But the dealer installed super sports, we don't know exactly how many rolled out because dealers didn't necessarily keep track of that. But basically what would happen is the factory would allow the dealers to install the Super Sport badging onto basically any Impala. And for the factory Super Sports, you know, you had a little bit more requirements as far as what engine and stuff. And this was originally a 348 car, but BB's dad later put a 63 model 409 in it. This is a 425 horse engine with 2 4s. This is a killer piece. And I'm betting that original 348 is around here somewhere. What makes this 61 even cooler is that it was drag raced back in the day. In fact, it was even drag raced by the dealer that sold it new. It was sold new at Abernethy Chevrolet in Hickory, North Carolina. And the car actually had a few miles on it because they'd drive it to and from the track, they'd drag race it, you know, and really kind of using it as a demonstrator to show off the horsepower of these new engines and this new Super Sport model. And BB's dad bought this thing from that dealership, so technically he's the first owner, even though the car already had some miles and some abuse on it. But he took it and raced it as well. He raced at Paradise Drag Strip, won a few trophies with it, which they've still got on display here. And the ultimate trophy is the car is still here. It still survives. He's still held on to it for all these years, and they can still get out and enjoy it. Also included in this collection are a lot of cool motorcycles, including this 70s Harley FLH. You got a modern Honda Goldwing. You got a couple other little Hondas here, including a Honda Dream, and then some old school dirt bikes that are really nicely preserved. Moving into another section of the shop, we're going to see some projects that BB and his dad have been chipping away at. And the first thing we're going to look at is a 40s Mercury. And this thing's got a really cool traditional flathead V8 in it. It's got aluminum heads, 2 carburetors. This is going to be a really cool hot rod when it's done. Then we got a 63 Impala 2-door hardtop. You got an old F100 pickup kind of in the distance there. Then we got a 70s Camaro, and then an early 60s Thunderbird convertible. One of the cars that I really liked was a 60s Buick Riviera. Obviously it's getting some body work done, but under the hood is what's really cool. It's got a 425 with 2 4s and factory air conditioning. This is a rare piece. The final car that I'm showing you in the project area of BB's big building is a 1962 Pontiac Catalina 9-passenger station wagon. And you'll notice if we look inside here that it's actually been converted to an 8-passenger because it's got bucket seats in the front, it's got a console, 4-speed, and you know, BB says that this thing kind of freaks people out because they think it's a factory 4-speed station wagon. The truth is that they found a wrecked car from Copart and they actually parted it out. They took the engine, the 4-speed transmission, the 8-lug hubs, the seats, console, all that stuff from the donor car. And then they took all those good parts and they put them in this 62 Catalina station wagon and they made a really cool piece. This thing is super solid. That 421 HO engine, it runs really good, especially that 4-speed behind it. The first thing we're going to look at in the race shop is a 56 Chevrolet dirt track car. Now BB said he grew up at the dirt track. His dad raced back in the day, back in the 60s and 70s, and he said these Tri-5 Chevys were a dime a dozen back then. People would butcher them up, beat them up out on the track, throw them away and go get another one. And he said when he found this car that he just had to have it. He wants to build it like one of his dad's old cars, kind of give it that old school look, and it's going to make a really fun project. The centerpiece in the race shop is BB's Willy's Gasser, and this thing runs in the Southeast Gassers Association in the C-Gas class, and this has been a drag car since 1959. BB tracked down all the history. He actually knew this car back in the day and he was able to buy it and keep it and preserve it all these years and put it back on the track. And it's got some really cool history, which I'm going to show you in a future episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, so stay tuned for that. Also in the shop we got tons of cool wall hangers, cool memorabilia, cool engine parts. We got a tri-power intake on a small block Chevrolet. We got 4-speed transmissions. We got cylinder heads. And then up above in the rafters, he's got wheel racks with all sorts of old school slotted mags and other old school wheels. Cool stuff everywhere you look inside the race shop. So that pretty much covers it for this first installment of BB's collection. I wanted to show you all the stuff that was indoors first. And next week we're coming back and we're going to show you all the stuff that's behind the barn, in the shed, under the carport, and in the woods. There's a lot of cool stuff to see. So I hope you come back next week. Thank you for watching.